feel as though they've been abandoned by their leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spoke to one gentleman earlier on today. Indeed, he was lighting that pyre there, where he took his friend for his last rites, organised the whole cremation, because every other member of the deceased family, it was a man, was already themselves suffering catastrophically, he said, from COVID. There was nobody to cope with the body. Indeed, when he was talking, another gentleman turned up who was a relative who'd already tested positive and looked very ill with the disease. And the reason it has run out of control here, as the critics of Mr. Modi would say, is that he was focused on political campaigning, firstly. Secondly, he pretty much announced a few months ago that India had somehow broken the back of the pandemic, that India had beaten the pandemic, even though the vaccination campaign was barely in its infancy. And as a consequence, he's not only allowed political campaigning, but the Kumbh Mela Hindu festival, when literally millions of people, cheek by jowl, worship at the banks of the river Ganges itself, a deity in their tradition, all or none of whom are socially isolated, all of whom are being encouraged to revel in this Hindu nationalism of the BJP, the ruling party here, including the mass rallies they've been having. And this, I'm afraid, is a consequence.
Sam, there is a big debate going on in this country right now about whether the Biden administration should get behind the request that India made to the World Trade Organization 6 months ago to share the IP, basically the recipe for vaccine from companies like Pfizer and Moderna, with other countries to create more vaccine. The Biden administration has not yet supported that. Bill Gates said it's not a good idea to do that. Others say it's necessary. Is that something that that would help in India? Do the people of India want that?
Bobby, I didn't quite catch a lot of that question because the system here is pretty ropey, as you can imagine. But I think you were asking me what is the issue and what is the attitude to the sharing, the international sharing and distribution of viruses. So in that context, there is great anger in this country that it is a net exporter of vaccines, particularly of the AstraZeneca strain, but of others too. They've also developed their own. But the country is blamed, or the government's blamed, for prioritising export and the goodwill that that would generate around the world over, its critics say, the health of its own people. On top of that, you have massive disparities of rich and poor in this country. So it hasn't taken a great deal, frankly, to overwhelm an already nearly overwhelmed public health system. And then a third aspect, which is something the Indians find really incomprehensible, is why it was that the United States had embargoed the export of some of the crucial ingredients for the construction, for the building of vaccines in this country back in America. Now, they're grateful that that has been lifted, but there is a strong sense, also an understanding, that Indians should have prioritised Indian population, just as the United Kingdom or the United States have prioritised their own population. The vaccination campaigns are seen as war campaigns. You do your responsibility as your own population first, and then everybody else. And that's definitely not how it's been perceived here. It's been perceived, and we haven't got a response at all from the government on this, but the regular blame placed at the feet of the government is that they were seeking international popularity at the expense of their own population.
Sam, Jim Sciutto here, and I know that the audio can be tough given where you are. Do doctors there blame particular new, more transmissible variants for the severity of the outbreak? Are they tracking that now?
Jim, they are trying to work out. They believe, my understanding is there may be 2 Indian variants. There isn't yet, so far as I understand it, sufficient evidence to show one way or the other whether the variants are more virulent, both in terms of transmission or in terms of death. And one of the reasons that's difficult to assess is that people are dying here through lack of oxygen. They're simply asphyxiating. They're not being kept alive through that critical period when their health crashes and their oxygen rates crash. They pass away rather than get the help that they need. That's why you're seeing such a big international effort now to get oxygen into India. Jim?
Sam, thank you for all of that on the ground. Really, it's so important to have you there. We'll be right back.